Hey everyone, welcome back to Trailbreaker. I recently got a chance to spend 4 days of amazing riding on a Deviate Highlander. Now, I had to give it back, so I guess we'll pretend this is it. But I'm going to do a review because this bike surprised me in a lot of ways. Deviate is a small Scottish company that does 140 and 150 millimeter all carbon frames that all feature this high pivot. They sell a frame and shock combination and specify the Cane Creek high volume air or coil shocks. The bike that I rode was pretty well spec'd. It had some sweet i9 wheels, had Shimano SLX for the stop and go, and a pretty nice MRP ribbon fork. So none of the components were going to hold back the performance of the frame. The frames are designed to be used with 29-inch wheels, but you could use 27.5 if you do like a 2.8-inch tire, and it's spec'd for 160 on the front. So even though the frames are all carbon, they've elected to go with external routing of the cables in this groove underneath the top tube. The only internal cable routing is for the seat post and a small section in the rear triangle for the derailleur shift cable. This bike is designed as an all-mountain, heavy-hitting trail bike. So the build I had was about 33 pounds. The frame with the shock is a little less than 7 pounds or so. So if you're counting grams, this may not be the frame for you. But if you're trying to get a bike that will pretty much do anything you want to do downhill besides actually racing downhill, and you're not really looking to race it XC, this is probably a great build. If you're building up a complete bike from scratch, or say you've damaged your frame, it's no longer in warranty, and you have all the other components, this thing would be a really eye-catching, awesome bike to build up. So the big feature of this bike is that high pivot. On your normal mountain bike, the pivot is at the top of the chain ring, so your axle path looks like this. On a high pivot, the pivot is right here, and the axle path you see as it goes through its travel, it actually moves backwards as it goes through its travel. And this has an amazing feel when you're going down the trail. What happens is when you end up throwing this bike into a big hole in the trail where there's a root or a rock right in front of you, which I did quite a bit, when you brace for that big impact and getting launched off of that rock, what happens is the wheel actually kind of moves out of the way of the bike, and it just feels like you've got a lot more travel on the bike. If you tend to pick terrible lines or no lines at all, this feature is pretty helpful. As I mentioned before, you can run this with a coil or an air shock. And the reason why they can do this is the geometry is set up that it's very, very progressive. I was running the Cane Creek Kitsuma air shock with the high-speed compression and rebound wide open. I've got almost the same shock on my Kona, and I run it in about the mid on that one because that bike ends up being a little more linear through its travel. I used full travel quite a bit, but I never ever felt like I was bottoming out. It just soaks things up, it gets out of the way, and you don't even feel it. So when you move that pivot point up, you have to do something with the chain because since that axle path moves away from the bottom bracket when it goes through its travel, if you take a big hit, your pedals will kick backwards. So by moving that idler pulley up to where the pivot is, it keeps the chain growth from happening. So as you're going down the trail, both under braking and in compression, your pedals aren't moving around a lot. And what it does also is it helps with the anti-squat. So when you're pedaling, you can feel the extra drag from that extra idler pulley, and you can actually hear it here too. But I will say that unless you're trying to get a PR on a climb, after a while you get used to just the way that it handles. And over the course of 4 days, we climbed about 8,000 feet, and it isn't that bad. So it doesn't climb great, but it climbs surprisingly well. You don't buy a bike like this to climb. You buy it to descend. So the bike that I rode was a size large, and the geometry was pretty much what you would expect for a modern trail bike. It was slack, but not too slack. It was long, but not too long. And the seat tube angle was pretty steep. And if you look at the seat tube itself, it's got a lot of room for a big dropper post, which I like. So who is this bike made for? If you like to ride gnarly trails or just make bad decisions in general on the trail, this bike might be for you. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're like me and refuse to act your age, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.